from sunny St Leonards on the south coast of the UK, this is the Keto Woman Podcast, brought to you by me, Daisy Brackenhall. Hello Keto lovelies, and welcome to episode number 200 of the Keto Woman Podcast. And today I am joined by my very good friend Terri Lance for another Mindset Matters episode. As you all hear us say, it was quite difficult for us to really put a pin in exactly what today's topic was, but rather just some sort of general things that we struggle with or maybe feel a bit uneasy with when we hear other people's struggles. So we just have a bit of a ramble chat, to borrow from my favourite podcaster Adam Buxton's phrase, around the topics we're trying to get a hold on. I always enjoy my chats with Terri and find them really productive and helpful. So I'm hoping you get as much from this episode as I did from recording it. What's been going on here? Well, the weather has been kind of typical for a British summer. That is a little bit chilly, overcast and sometimes rainy. I'm not complaining though, not really. It's better than it being as hot as it was in France when I just had to hide away for most of the day or boil out on my strimming jobs. I have been in the sea. It's been a little bit rough and I got tumbled in the shingle yesterday, but I managed to flip over, and so it was my backside that got grazed along the shingle instead of getting thrown onto my knee. And seeing as there's a lot more padding in that area, it was far less uncomfortable than it was the first time it happened. Although it can be a bit challenging to get in and out when the waves are choppy, it's great fun when you're in there. I got myself a new set of earbuds as the old ones seem to have stopped working. And I think it's a bit unsociable to walk around with things blaring out of your phone, and prefer to keep it private in my own ears. Thank you very much. But I'm glad that I did, because I'm the best part of the way through 3 books now in less than 2 weeks. So it really is a great way of reading some books, listening to the audiobook version. If you've been listening to Monday Mindset, you'll hear me talking about James Nestor's book, Breath. Or at least you will do. I forget where I'm at in the timeline of recordings and what's actually out there for you to listen to. If it's not out yet, it will be coming up soon. It's one of those books that I really think should be mandatory reading. I think they should be teaching these things in schools. It's so important. And I've become very, very mindful of when I'm breathing through my mouth. I'm predominantly a nasal breather, but I do from time to time breathe through my mouth, and I'm becoming much more aware of that and trying to keep it down to an absolute minimum, because the health benefits, or the health detriments, if you are a mouth breather, are so numerous. It's really worth making the effort. I highly recommend the book anyway. It really is a very good read, or listen if you've got it in your ears like I've had. The other book I've been listening to is a book about dog psychology by Jean Donaldson called The Culture Clash. And this was recommended to me by Janine. She's the woman who's been helping me with Rocket and his anxiety problems. And it really is a very good book. If you want to know more about your dog and stop pushing human traits onto them, I really can recommend this book. Very, very helpful for really understanding your canine friends. And talking of Janine and Rocket, I have managed to persuade Janine to come on the podcast. So before long, you will get to hear her story and all sorts of things, I'm sure, about dog psychology and her rescue, which is based in Spain. I'm really looking forward to it because I always enjoy my chats with her anyway. So I'm really, really thrilled to be able to share those with you. As to Rocket, he really is coming on in leaps and bounds. The tablets that Janine recommended are clearly working, and he is much more calm. He still does duck under the bed his safety zone from time to time. But for the most part, he's spending the days outside from under the bed, either in the crate or on the sofa next to me. And he's starting to get pushy again in the mornings when it's time for a walk. And he's enjoying his walks. He's back off the lead again in the park we go to that is securely fenced. And what I've been trying to do is to time it so that we get in and out before he starts to get worried. What I'm always trying to do is to stop him getting to that tipping point where the anxiety kicks in and he starts to get worried. If I can get him home while he's still happy, then of course the association with walks is a positive one. And for the most part, that seems to be working, and he is back to getting excited about walks with his tail in the air, wagging away. He's not all the way there yet, of course, but he's definitely getting there. That's the main thing, and I'm hopeful he will be back to his old self before too long. I'm going out this evening for the first time, I think the first time since I've moved back here, actually, if you don't include the moonlight swims, which haven't been moonlit because the moon hasn't made an appearance. There's another one this weekend, but unfortunately I'm not going to be here, so I won't make it. Maybe I'll just have to go for my own one next week while the moon is still out. If we can see it, it has been very cloudy. But I'm going out for a drink and a meal with some girlfriends, new friends that I've made since I've been here in the UK. My dog walking buddies, and one of them is my swim buddy too. So that will be nice, and I'm really looking forward to it. There are two things I'm missing this weekend. One is the moonlit swim, but the other is a demonstration on Friday evening against Southern Water and their awful polluting ways. There's going to be a red flag demonstration down on the beach Friday evening. Friends of mine will be going, and I wish I could be there too, but I am going away camping with the family. The weather, of course, is predicted to be raining over the weekend, typically, but at least it's not going to be too hot, so I will have my camping buddy Bets to go with me, which will be nice. The two young ones will be going into kennels, which they won't love, but they'll be okay. We've already been over to visit the kennels, and it's a really nice place. And the guy we met who runs it is lovely and obviously takes really good care of the dogs. They'll have their own food, and I'll send them with their new snuffle mats and some toys. It's only for a few days, and they'll be fine, I'm sure. I'll be putting into practice some of the things I've been talking about in recent episodes and the episode that you're about to hear now. One of the things I really struggle with when I'm around my family, or any people, I guess, for that matter, who are eating carby foods, and when those foods are freely available, I head into the situation with such resolve that I really struggle when I get there, not to succumb to the temptation. So this time I'm going armed with all sorts of goodies. For the most part, I know they're going to be eating plant-based. They're mostly plant-based, all of them these days, and I'm mostly animal foods-based. So that's not exactly compatible. And that's not to say that they don't really make an effort to cater for me, because they do. But why not just take things myself and make it easier for everyone? I've got some deliciously guilt-free cakes from Dan Grief, some peanuts for when I'm sure the crisps and other snacks will come out, and I'm going to take some pre-cooked bacon, sausages and hard-boiled eggs for my breakfasts. So basically, I'm set. Evening meals won't be too difficult, I'm sure. I'm determined this time to stay true to my keto values and principles. But this time, I'm making it really, really easy for myself. Hopefully, I'll get a swim in on Friday morning before I leave, because we're a long way inland, so there won't be any swimming for the entire weekend, as far as I know anyway, which I'm already a little bit grumpy about. So I better get a swim in just to get my fix. I've seen some posts recently about people already looking forward to the colder water swims of the winter. And I have to say, I'm kind of excited about that too. It's wonderful being able to walk straight into the sea and for it not to be cold. It's about 18 degrees Celsius at the moment. But you do also miss that thrill of the icy cold water. Although I'm sure I'll be complaining about it and mourning the loss of the warm weather when the winter does come around. The bit that's not so easy, of course, is the getting changed afterwards. Trying to get clothes on when you're still damp and cold is not the easiest of things. But that buzz of the cold water, there's nothing quite like it. So I think that's about it for my roundup. No sign of the builder, despite the fact that he was scheduled to be here today, tomorrow and Friday. I'm here with you recording on a Wednesday evening so that I can get this edited and loaded up, ready to go for Friday morning when I won't be here. I have to say I'm very disappointed. He seemed like such a lovely guy. And he is a lovely guy, I'm sure, but he's gone AWOL. I have no idea where he is, and he's ignoring all my attempts at trying to get hold of him. I am actually really easygoing when it comes to things like that, and I understand delays, overbooking, all the things that can happen. But what I really can't take is when people just ignore me and refuse to have a conversation and figure things out. My anxiety really ramps up, and I can feel myself getting towards that point where the depression kicks back in, when I'm just left in limbo and have no idea what's going on. So hopefully before too long, I'll manage to speak to him and we can sort things out, even if it means I have to start all over again and try and find another builder, which will be a nightmare. But at least once I know, I can deal with it and work out what best to do. I hope wherever you are, you're having a good week. You're heading towards a fabulous weekend. Maybe the sun is shining. It looks like it's trying to come out, and it might just be a lovely evening for my evening out with the girls. Let's hope so. But without further ado, and with a lot less of me rambling, let's get started with episode number 200 and the very wonderful Terri Lance. Welcome back, Terri, to the Keto Woman podcast. It's very good to have you here for episode number 200.
The crowd goes crazy.
There's something, isn't there, about those whole round numbers that feels more significant.
Very nice. Very good to be here.
So I thought, who better to celebrate episode number 200 with me than my very good friend and Monday Mindset podcast co-host, Terri Lance. So we thought we would do another Mindset Matters episode. What are we going to talk about today, Terri?
Daisy, I think that as you and I have been talking about this for a while now, it's not a topic that either of us can just kind of easily pinpoint. It's this, let's talk about this. But every time we start talking about it, it morphs into 5 other kind of topics as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there, and then we'll just talk about it as we go. But I think both of us are aware and wanting to find ways to share things that might help people in their process in eating low carb, ketogenically, because so much of it is about mindset. It is not just, do you know the rules? Because there aren't really keto or low carb rules. There are concepts that you need to apply and see how they work with your body. But what I think both of us have been sharing with each other is what we hear from people who are struggling, particularly when they're earlier on in their journey and in beginning to incorporate a change in lifestyle that's pretty significant for them, letting go of certain foods, changing what meals look like, and then coming back maybe to a group or to a conversation and maybe confessing what they've eaten that's not on their plan, maybe explain why they had a cheat meal or a cheat day or a cheat weekend, or maybe just overall sharing that they're struggling with making this a lifestyle. Like they have good intention, and you will hear them say, I'm doing great when I'm eating low carb. I did keto for 4 days last week and I felt so good. And then Thursday hit and this happened and I ate this and, So my hope is that you and I can just share some of our experiences, not only our personal experiences, but even experiences we've been through with other people, and process some of this in a way that might help people continue to work on the mindset of this lifestyle that they are incorporating, rather than getting hung up on rules and doing it right or cheating or whatever they're struggling with.
Yes, because it is a process that evolves. And I think we're both keenly aware that we don't want to set ourselves up as paragons of virtue, because we most certainly aren't. And the way I've always liked to look at and say to people to look at to gain the perspective of when you do eat things that aren't congruent with the way you say that you want to be eating, is to learn something from it. And I do still think that's very helpful. And I like to think that I learn every time I make one of those choices. I learn something from it that informs me about future choices I make, but also feeds back into building that system that I want to stick to. Maybe I need to make some changes to it. And I think we both very much don't like that word cheat, that concept. It really sets up a divisive kind of tone, doesn't it? I mean, I prefer thinking of it in terms of making a choice, making a decision. But I mean, I guess however you want to put it, it's making a choice or a decision that isn't congruent with the value system that you've set up. I know we were talking before we started, and I'm really interested to hear you share more about that, about commitment and making a vow to yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the most important things, as soon as I even hear you say that about cheating, I think it's important for everyone to look at, who are you cheating when you do that? Who or what are you cheating? Because I have to look at it. If I were to use that phrase, again, I don't like to use that phrase, but it really, my answer would be, I'm cheating myself. I'm cheating myself out of my goals. I'm cheating myself out of my feeling healthy. So let's say, for example, I have a particular inflammatory condition, and I know that when I eat flour and sugar, immediately I can feel the difference in my joints. If I say, over the weekend I cheated and had these, desserts and things, I think it's better to just really phrase what you did. I cheated myself. I gave myself physical pain because I wanted that food. Now, some people don't like when I talk like this, but to me, it's about really naming it more clearly. And you've heard me tell the story 100 times probably. When I was diabetic, I was experiencing neuropathy pain in my thighs. And I kept reaching down to this table of holiday desserts at work. And I found out that what I was experiencing was neuropathy, but I still wanted those desserts. And so when I leaned down to grab one, I said to myself, go ahead, you can have more neuropathy. It's okay. Which flavor of neuropathy do you want? So for me, it's about just being honest about what's actually happening, because I do have the right to decide that. But it does me no good to decide that and then explain it away to someone else and say, I know, but I couldn't help it. I mean, there were so many choices and I had to keep walking through that room. I knew darn right well what I was doing. I was choosing more neuropathy if I chose to eat that. And so I think just naming it, saying it. And so the idea of saying, if you've chosen to change how you're eating to a ketogenic approach or a low carb approach, my guess is you probably have some pretty significant reasons. You have weight loss that is important to you, excess weight that you really want to be able to shed. You have a health condition, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, PCOS, all kinds of things that you want to help treat by by changing your nutritional approach. And then I assume that you decided this knowing it was a big decision. And in my way of talking about it, what I mentioned to you earlier is it's about making a commitment or taking a vow. I first read this in a book by Molly Carmel. The book is called Breaking Up with Sugar. And the book is all about breaking up with sugar, flour, and sweetener. Now, of course, there are things that she talks about in there about how to eat that I don't agree with. But I love all of her messaging around living your life congruent with your values and being aware, how do sugar, flour, and sweeteners interfere with me living my life according to those values? She talks about it's a vow you take to yourself, you make to yourself. And when I first read it, I really had to think about it. It is, if you think about it, it's like a marriage vow. You don't say, hey, I love you and am committed to you, and I want to enhance your life and you to enhance mine. But on weekends, I might need to do some other things that defy that. That's not a vow. And so I think it's important to really connect with our why. Why have I chosen to eat this way? Because it's not a simple change to make. Then how can I live those values and feel good about them? How can I follow my commitment to myself? Because you're not harming anyone else when you eat differently than your goal is. It only slows down your goal or interferes for you or makes you unwell. And then I think you mentioned this in our discussion prior to this, but I think that's a really important thing, because what is that saying that you believe in this so much, but you're not willing to do it for yourself? And again, not that I'm perfect with any of this either, but it reminds me a little bit when I would buy a lot of exercise equipment and then not use it.
Yeah, I've done that.
So, Terri, you were committed to this goal to the point that you would spend $500 on this piece of equipment. Why are you not committed to using it and helping yourself? What's the breakdown there? Again, I don't say this in a shaming or blaming way. I hope people can ask themselves this to really understand themselves. Why am I not committing to myself on these really important things? Because in other ways, keeping vows to other people, a lot of us put more priority on that. If you have a work deadline, you follow that commitment, even if it means you stay up late that week getting it done. Even if it means you work during lunch, you follow through with that commitment. If you make a promise to your kids or your partner or whomever, you probably are willing to go out of your comfort zone to make it happen. So why is it when it's a commitment to yourself, do you not do that in the same way? So again, just asking ourselves that, exploring what's the breakdown there? What happens? I go from this great intention to engaging in this behavior.
Yeah, it's finding out, isn't it, where along the way, and it's quite likely multiple points where things are just going a bit wrong. And I go back to this idea of the word cheat. And I wonder if one of the reasons people quite like using it as a term, it's quite often associated with something external where you can put the blame on something external, or it's, you know, it's a bit naughty, like maybe when you were naughty at school or something. It's something outside of yourself. It's not yourself you're cheating. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, it's something else. It's the system. You know, there's something a bit mischievous and maybe even exciting about cheating the system, isn't there? Rebelling against the system, being a bit naughty. But actually, when it's just yourself that you're cheating, it's nothing external. It's yourself. It's actually a lot more difficult to face. than, you know, this mythical external entity that you're railing against, when it's actually just yourself that you're cheating. That's a lot more difficult to face up to, I think.
Well, and it loses some of the allure. Not quite so sexy now.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think when it comes to, you and I mentioned this again prior to coming on here today, but I think an important thing for all of us also to reflect on is, what are my commitments to myself? And let's say, for example...
Yes, because maybe that needs to change.
Yeah. Let's say, for example, I say, oh, I'm going to eat keto and I'm only going to have 25 carbs a day, no matter what. Is that a commitment I'm really committed to?
Yeah. Or is it some arbitrary number?
Absolutely. Or let's say it doesn't fit with how I eat. Let's say I eat a fair amount of protein, but I like to eat a lot of vegetables. That it's almost challenging for me to stay under 25 carbs. Again, then that vow doesn't really make much sense. Now, it doesn't mean I need to say, screw it, I'm not going to do this at all, but maybe I need to adjust what that vow is.
And you can be quite specific about it.
Absolutely.
You know, so to an outsider, it might seem like an arbitrary number that you've just, you know, you've raised your carb count to make it a bit easier. And this is where I think it's important to get specific about things, get specific about the commitment that you want to make, the vows you want to make. Yeah, I eat more carbs, but I'm very picky about what those carbs are. They're whole food vegetables. I love my vegetables. That's something I can commit to, but I can only commit if I'm eating a certain number. And I mean, unless you really need to be very, very strict for some reason to have your ketones up above a certain level or something like that. You know, most people aren't going to be damaged by eating more whole food vegetables. So if that's something that's really going to work for you and something that you can commit to, whereas the arbitrary number of 20, 25 grams, whatever it was something that you kept, you know, quote unquote, cheating and railing against, maybe you do need to change the commitment itself.
And unfortunately, I think the reality is most people around that topic, it's not the healthy whole foods that are the challenge.
No.
It's the highly processed, it's the desserts, it's the snack foods and things like that. And so again, I think even figuring out commitments beyond just a number of carbs. So for example, one of my commitments is I eat 2 meals a day. So if I have foods that would fall into a more snack kind of category, they still come at my mealtime, because otherwise I will very quickly fall back into snacking all day. And so for me, I'm pretty careful. I don't have a lot of those type of foods around me. I don't, you know, put myself in situations where I could easily access them. But let's say, for example, someone's working on eating low carb or keto, and they've set a clear macro goal or eating approach for them, but they keep coming to this place where they want to eat off plan or cheat. Again, I would just invite them to look at, is my plan actually a plan that makes sense for me? And I think this gets complicated though, because let's say, for example, it's summertime, your spouse and your kids, you have a cottage that you go to on the weekends, and Sunday, every time when you're driving back from the cottage, you stop at your favorite ice cream place. Now, some people might be able to approach it and say, you know, based on my health and my goals, I'm okay with doing that. I'm going to still stop and get ice cream once a week. Other people, that's going to throw them off inflammation-wise, psychologically, emotionally, where if they eat that Sunday night, then they're going to want something else on Monday and Tuesday. And so just having to kind of reassess your plan, your commitment. Are you someone who is willing to commit to when we stop, I won't be getting ice cream. And I know this, I'm making it sound easy, and I know it's not always easy, but to really have that inner dialogue, because we know those foods will be around.
Mm.
You just had an example you shared with me where you met up with some people and several people in the group had cake and you chose not to. It was a choice. You didn't have to have cake just because you were gathering with people, but you had to make a decision. And I'm guessing at some level you had to make it based on, what do I value about my approach right now?
Mm. No, that's right. Absolutely. And there are different decisions that are more or less difficult because they're problem foods. I mean, as soon as you mentioned ice cream there, that scenario that you mentioned would be something that I would find almost impossible not to say, well, I am going to have that ice cream once a week on the way back. Until I guess I played around with that choice, I wouldn't know what the roll-on impact would be. You know, it's a bit like I do have one of my rules is regarding chips or French fries for Americans. That is something that I will have when I go out. I will not have potatoes in the house because I will end up eating them all the time. But I do really love chips if they're really good chips. And it's my rule that I will have them when I'm out. If I see them, they look like they're good ones and I fancy having them. It's actually a very rare occurrence, and it doesn't end up having, you know, an avalanche effect where I start eating all the things or whatever it is. But I had to play around with that and see if it would work, see if it wouldn't work. And, you know, at one point it did lead into the, oh, well, I'll just try, you know, taking one potato home and making something because I fancy it this day. And I had to refine it until there were very firm rules in place that I could make it work. Or I would have had to cut it completely.
Which I think is also a great topic within all of this too, is that rules or parameters that we make for ourselves, they may evolve over time. There was a time when I was eating very ketogenically and I wouldn't have thought to eat a potato. And now I eat higher carb. Though my body is still in ketosis most of the time, I eat a higher carb natural food like a potato a couple times a week now. But that's, again, different for different people and depending on your goals. You know, my body's at a point now where it manages that well. I couldn't do that 3 years ago when my body wasn't handling those foods as well. And so even the idea that you allowed yourself to explore, and I think most of us sometimes have to learn the hard way with this.
Oh, yeah.
We want to give ourselves a little bit too much latitude. And then we realize, wow, that feels like I'm getting out of hand with this. Where do I need to draw the boundary? So for example, for you, you eat it when you're out. I know that you're not someone who goes out 3 times a week, so you're obviously not eating it 3 times a week. So giving ourselves parameters for some people is so important because it takes it out of that realm of all or nothing. And I know for some people, they do better with all or nothing. And other people do better with, I need to have some choice in there. I will have these things or this food or whatever, but on these occasions or with this frequency, that we have to put parameters around it to make it manageable and something that we can enjoy without interfering with our goals or our health or whatever those goals are about.
Yes, because that's a very difficult thing to say to yourself, isn't it? If there's something, a food that you've particularly enjoyed, or maybe it's just something you've got comfort from and not actually particularly enjoyed, but whatever it is, it's a food that you would struggle with the concept of giving up. You know, if you had to say to yourself, right, I am never going to eat insert food item ever again. I'm never going to eat it again. Well, that is probably enough to instill panic in a lot of people's minds, and it's not something they could say. So like you're saying, if you can build these rules, build these parameters where it allows that to still be in your life to a certain extent and keep reassessing, because I know I need to make that commitment. I need to make that vow that I will never have Coke Zero again. I know that because I break those parameters. I've made that commitment. I've made that vow before, and I've broken it with that. I'll just give in to that moment. It's been a hot day. Maybe I've been working in the garden, got a bit hot and dusty. That ice cold Coke Zero that I can see in the fridge, in the shop. I'll just have that one as I'm passing. That will be my rule. I'll never take it home. I'll never buy a 6-pack again. I'll just have that one. Can't do it. That one always, without fail, ends up with me mainlining the stuff and feeling rubbish. And I have to give it up. So I know that's what I have to do. And it's a commitment that I've made. And it is a vow that I have broken. I hope it's a vow that I will never break again. I can't promise to you that I won't, but I know full well with 100% certainty what will happen if I do. But I can make the vow to say, I do value myself enough not to do it again. And I make the vow that I'm going to try my utmost to never let it pass my lips again. And that's as far as I can go at this moment. But, so like you say, these things evolve and you can learn a lot from any experiences that you do have. And we've spoken about setting up your value system and making these things a part of your identity. And there is that question. If you break that, what's at the root of that? Is it that you don't value yourself enough to stick to that vow, to stick to that commitment? Because as we've already said, the only person you're cheating is yourself. So is that what's at the root of it?
And this gets complicated because, there's so many ways we talk ourselves in and out of decisions. But it reminds me of something years ago when I was in practice as a psychologist, and I had listened to a webinar about motivation. And I have a lot of challenges about the concept of motivation, because the idea that we feel like we will do something when motivation comes to us, and we won't do it if we don't feel motivated. Well, the reality is, motivation does not fall out of the sky on you. It's something we build and we have to nurture and develop.
Practice.
And practice. Absolutely. I used to always use this example, because one of the biggest topics at the time that I remembered clients talking about lacking motivation for was exercise. And I said, okay, well, I want to ask you a question. If I asked you if you could walk for 30 minutes every day for 30 days, with what certainty could you say yes? And they'd be like, I could probably do quite a few of them, but, my kids have soccer and it's at this time, and I, have lunch hour. Okay. So if I said, here's $1 million, if you walk for 30 minutes a day, every day for 30 days, to what degree of certainty can you tell me you would do that? 100%. Well, what about the fact that your kids have soccer after school? Well, I would do this after dinner. Okay. Well, what about the fact that you can't walk during lunchtime? All of those reasons why they couldn't commit to it before, they had no problem committing to it when there was $1 million at stake. And so again, I go back to this whole point, and I know it's an overused motivational thing right now, but our why is so important. If that $1 million was important to that person, come hell or high water, they would get in that 30 minutes. If I told you, Daisy, if you never drink a Coke Zero again, I will pay you $1 million a year. How many years would you go without it?
Quite a few.
Quite a few, right? So again, it's one of those things that I think we have to keep digging inside. Why is this important enough to me?
Yeah, you got to find £1 million why.
Yeah, absolutely. So one other thing I wanted to talk about before we go that I think is a book I would recommend to every person who listens to this. And honestly, even if you don't describe yourself as someone who is an emotional eater, I think everyone could benefit from the book regardless. The book is called When Food is Comfort, and it's written by Julie Simon. And what she does in this book is a fantastic job of really the underbelly of why we use food, and you could substitute in something else if it's not food, why we use this, as Robert Sivas would say, if you listen to him, as an emotional management tool. And if you think about it, we learned to use food in infancy. We learned to be calmed, and people learned to satisfy and calm us with food. And so most of us have at some level developed eating strategies as a way of meeting our needs, addressing our discomfort or tension. And for many of us, it's not just any food, it's specific foods. It is not a keto book. It is not a low carb book, but it is really about kind of human nature and why we learn those behaviors and some great strategies to break those habits and learn to be able to address our needs and our feelings without the automatic turning to the food to do that.
That sounds like a really interesting read. We ought to do a book club week one week. We read something like that, maybe. That would be a good book to then come and talk about it and share. It's reminding me a bit of the episode, actually, that we've just recorded for Monday Mindset, where I talked about, he was talking about pillars for stress management. But the thing that really strikes me is that the last pillar was self-love. And that was built on the 3 previous pillars of self-gratitude, forgiveness, and compassion. But he spoke about self-love as being really important in when you finally get to this place where you can give yourself unconditional love. And that's certainly something that I will struggle with a bit. And one of the things I said was to maybe take yourself outside yourself a little bit and think about how you would apply that to somebody that you give unconditional love to. You know, and when I think of my dogs, for example, I love them unconditionally. And I wouldn't dream of doing something consciously that I know the consequences of that would cause them harm, that would cause them pain. So I think when you can picture it in an example like that and you can feel the emotion that brings up to the surface, you know, imagine yourself doing something to that being that you feel love so unconditionally. Imagine knowingly hurting them, causing them pain. Okay, so if we now apply that to ourselves and this value system and this commitment and these vows that we make to ourselves, what are we saying about ourselves when we break that commitment? We're doing the same thing, aren't we? So it's a difficult thing to work on, but I think when you can truly say that you love yourself unconditionally, you might find it a bit easier not to want to harm yourself.
And in the book, When Food is Comfort, the author really goes through a process of kind of activating that inner nurturing voice. So let's say, for example, I just had a really stressful meeting and I want to go get a candy bar. Well, the part of me that's in that emotional response system is like the childlike version of me. It's caught in that emotional state and it just wants comfort and relief. So if I can then have, and I know it sounds a little hokey, but if I can kind of have an internal dialogue with my nurturing self and that child, that young feeling state that says, I know that was a really difficult meeting and it was hard for you to sit through that and to hear that. And I know you want a candy bar, but we're not going to eat a candy bar right now because of all of the things that it does to us. What else can we do right now to help us feel better? So it's not a enabling inner voice that says, oh, honey, that meeting was so hard. You should have that candy bar.
You go.
It says, hey, eating a candy bar is not congruent with our values, so we're not going to do it. But I understand the need, and I'm going to help you meet that need. Because the need is never for the candy bar. The need is never for the food, actually. Most of the food that any of us get into any difficulty with has nothing to do with hunger.
No, exactly. Or
need of food. It has to do with discomfort, tension, emotional responses that we're not even completely aware of, or we don't know what to do about. So again, I cannot recommend this book highly enough, but there are very tangible things. Using the model that you were talking about, I think is exactly right. Applying that, how would you care for someone else in this situation? If someone else said, I'm diabetic and when I eat cake, it just kills my blood sugar and I'm going to have to go on insulin if I don't get this under control. When you see them struggling with something, you would not say, here, why don't you just have some cake? You'll feel better. You would help them find another way to feel better, right?
Yes, and I think that's often a useful stopgap, isn't it? Until you can genuinely feel that for yourself. Because for a lot of us, that's going to take a fair bit of work to get to that place, let's face it. But if we can apply it with a scenario that we can easily think of what we would do in that situation, it becomes a little bit easier to take those steps towards it in the here and now, rather than, this would be great when I can get to that point where I love myself so unconditionally that I won't do those things, but I'm not going to be able to do that tomorrow.
And also, I think this kind of ties back, though, to the whole idea of cheating. To not tell ourselves that cheating is the only way we're going to be able to handle this situation. Because we do a lot of bargaining with ourselves. Oh, I'll eat this now, but tomorrow I'm going to be really good and do this. And we do a lot of this internal, justifying and bargaining and things. And so maybe even to say, yes, I'm struggling right now and I want to handle it in the healthiest way I know how. I don't want to harm myself. So what is the next healthiest thing I can do? Like you said, it may not be perfect yet. It may be, eating something that's less damaging than the original tempting thing. But it's a step in the right direction until those skills really get built up.
Well, I think that was a very interesting ramble around and delving into all sorts of things that I certainly found useful, and I hope the people at home did too. So thank you for that interesting ramble. It always is with you, Terri.
Thanks, Daisy. And I would also encourage listeners, if these kind of mindset topics are things that you're interested in, I think Daisy and I are both open to suggestions or ideas, things that you'd like to hear discussed. We'd be open to that feedback. So we would look forward to hearing from you for ideas for future episodes that we record.
Most definitely. Well, you know what I'm going to ask you now to wrap up the episode. If you could see Terri's face right now, because of course she had forgotten. Please, could we have a top tip?
So my top tips are going to be pretty broad today rather than really specific things. But the first really broad category is I hope everyone will remain open to and become open to, if they aren't already there now, but to doing the internal work I think all of these big lifestyle changes are so ripe with personal growth opportunities. Rather than just saying, I'm someone who always breaks my plan, I'm someone who cheats all the time. Come to know yourself differently. Be open to the idea of learning new ways to manage emotions and triggers and things that lead to those behaviors. So one is just to be open and dig in and do the work.
So you've set yourself up now. You only actually had to come up with one.
Oh, I did? I thought you said 3 top tips.
No, I said a top tip.
Oh. And then my last tip today, Daisy, really would be about, as much as possible, not setting yourself up for situations that tend toward failure. Be looking at ways to set yourself up for growth, improvement, not perfection, but improvement, taking steps forward. And sometimes I think when we set up our commitments and our plans, we do it in ways that it's almost inevitable that we're not going to be able to do it to the T. And then we get frustrated with ourselves. It reinforces old negative self-messaging, and it just leads us down that path of doing more problematic things. And so being mindful of how we set ourselves up, setting ourselves up for success and progress versus all or nothing success or failure.
Yes, because you're setting it up so that you've got that ready-made excuse just to pull straight off the shelf. Mm-hmm. If you know a situation is going to be particularly challenging, well, it's best to try and avoid that or find some kind of diversion. Whereas if you set yourself up for a situation where you're most likely going to quote unquote fail, well, you're there straight away with the ready-made excuse. Well, that's a situation that I can never deal with, so I was bound to go off the rails, or, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So yes, thinking ahead of time and trying to arrange a way around it.
Absolutely.
Is a really good idea. Well, thank you so much for sharing this 200th. Did I mention before that it's my 200th episode?
That's fantastic, Daisy.
I mean, I'm no Lewis Howes. I should really wait until my 1000th episode before I get super excited, shouldn't I? But still, thank you very much for sharing this episode with me. It was a very great pleasure, as always. Thank you, Terri.
Thank you, Daisy. Take good care.
Thank you so much for staying with me right to the bitter end. I do appreciate it. As Terri mentioned in the episode, we are always open to hearing from you and some ideas that you might have for topics that you'd like to hear us talk about. Do get in touch if there's something you'd like us to talk about, a problem you have that we might be able to help with. You know by now how to get hold of me. You can find me on various social media platforms, in my Facebook group, Kick-Ass Keto Bitches, or you can email me at daisy@ketowomenpodcast.com. I look forward to hearing from you. This week, I thought I would ask Terri for her favourite quote for this week's end quote. And this is one of those quotes that it's really hard to find out who to attribute it to. Jon Kabat-Zinn, the mindfulness expert, guru, whatever you like to call him, father of mindfulness maybe, he comes up as top of the list. But when you dig a little deeper, there are other people who potentially said it or wrote it first. So who knows? I think we're going to go with anonymous or unknown maybe might be better. So here it is, this week's end quote and Terri's favourite. Wherever you go, there you are. Until next time, please take very good care. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.